Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to dive into something important today?
Always ready?
This time we're tackling the Georgia foster care system.
Yeah,
It's a tough one, but definitely crucial.
absolutely. A system that's, meant to protect kids, it's got to work.
You got it. And to get a handle on things, we've got a few sources to dig into.
Okay, let's hear it.
First up, a Senate subcommittee report. They went all in on this.
Oh, wow. Serious stuff.
Then we've got a YouTube news segment transcript from 11 Alive.
Interesting. So we'll get some, on-the-ground perspectives.
Exactly, and rounding things out, an advocacy document.
So a mix of voices there, different angles.
Exactly. And our goal, think of this deep dive as like a shortcut to really understanding the key issues.
Makes sense. Break it down.
Yeah, what folks are saying and what's being done to, make things better.
So where do we even start with all this?
Well, the Senate subcommittee, they didn't hold back.
Sounds like they found some things.
They did. Their investigation basically confirms system-wide failures within Georgia's Division of Family and Children Services, DFCS.
The FCS, right? I've heard, you hear things, but this is official.
It is, and we're not talking just isolated incidents. This report's pointing to a pattern of problems.
Problems that are putting kids at risk.
Exactly.
What gets me is the report. It goes beyond just stories and anecdotes.
Okay, so they've got hard data to back this up.
Yeah, they dug into DFCS's own performance reviews, even audits.
And the results weren't good.
Let's just say the numbers are pretty alarming in some parts of Georgia. Get this. 0 reviewed cases showed DFCS meeting basic federal standards for child safety.
0. Hang on, 0. We're talking about the bare minimum here, right?
Like absolute basics for protecting kids.
And they're coming up empty. That's mind-blowing.
Especially when you think about, these are real kids' lives hanging in the balance.
Exactly. It's not just numbers on a page.
Huh. And the report, to its credit, it doesn't shy away from showing what happens when these failures, when they have real consequences.
Yeah, I was reading about some of those cases.
One that sticks with you, there's case, 2-year-old girl, Brooklyn.
Oh, I remember that one. Just awful.
DFCS placed her with caregivers who, get this, had felony records.
Wait, hold on. Felony records.
Information that a basic background check would have revealed.
A simple background check. Something that should be standard procedure.
You'd think, right. And tragically, Brooklyn, she was murdered in their care.
It's just heartbreaking, You have to wonder, how can a system designed to protect kids, how can it fail so badly?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Our sources, they point to some major culprits.
Okay, like what?
Mismanagement and this severe understaffing within DFCS.
Right, and what's interesting, you see this theme pop up everywhere.
Oh, you mean in all of our sources?
Yeah, the Senate report, the citizen review panels, even that 11 Alive news segment, they all zero in on this mismanagement issue.
So it's not just one perspective saying this, it's coming from multiple angles.
Exactly, and we're talking high turnover rates, people leaving left and right.
And then you've got inexperienced workers making decisions, big decisions, about kids' lives.
And on top of that, the lack of training, supervision, it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And then you get this vicious cycle, right? The YouTube segment, it talks about those 25 DFCS workers in Fulton County.
Oh, the ones who got fired.
Yeah, they staged a sick out to protest the conditions.
They were saying that, kids were being put at risk because they were so short-staffed, right?
Exactly, and they got fired for speaking up.
Which, honestly, that's a bit worrying, isn't it?
It is. It speaks to this, maybe a culture of fear, lack of accountability.
Yeah, and that advocacy document we have, it really digs into this point about the workers.
They're saying the caseworkers are underpaid, overworked.
Leading to burnout, making that staffing shortage even worse.
Wow, I can't imagine the pressure on those folks trying to help kids in a system with so many hurdles.
It's got to be incredibly tough.
And as we go deeper into this report, it gets tougher.
What do you mean?
More disturbing examples of what happens when things go wrong.
Okay, so specific cases where kids were harmed because of these failures.
Yeah, there's this one, a 12-month-old baby who drowned.
Oh, that's awful.
DFCS, they were alerted to the mother's mental distress, but didn't respond urgently enough.
So, a delay in response had tragic consequences.
And there's another case, a child who died in a fire set by her mother.
Oh, gosh, that's just...
Her grandmother had reported the mother's mental health issues.
Yeah.
But DFCS they ignored those concerns.
It's devastating, and it's a reminder that these aren't just statistics.
Yeah, these are real kids, real lives, tragically cut short.
And it's not only about, immediate safety either.
Okay, so there are long-term concerns, too.
The report brings up the well-being of kids in DFCS care in general, like over time.
And what are they seeing there?
One thing that's really alarming is the number of kids who just go missing from the system.
Missing, like they just disappear.
Yeah, and the connection to child trafficking, it's terrifying.
We've talked about trafficking on the show before. It's a huge issue.
It is. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC,
Yeah, NCMEC, they do crucial work.
they say that almost 2,000 kids in DFCS care were reported missing between 2018 and 2022.
That's a huge number.
And here's the really disturbing part. They estimate that around 410 of those missing kids were likely victims of sex trafficking.
So like 1 in 5.
It's a scary reminder of how vulnerable these kids are, nationwide. NCMEC data shows that almost 1 in 5 children missing from foster care, they become victims of trafficking.
And that begs the question, what are they doing to protect these kids?
What measures are in place? It's a question that needs an answer.
You're right, we can't just gloss over that. But before we move on to what's being done,
Okay.
there's another really concerning issue in this report.
Okay, what's that?
Kids being held in detention too long,
Huh.
and then the overuse of psychotropic medications.
Oh, wow. So, like, issues on both ends of the spectrum, freedom and medication?
Yeah, the system, it seems like it's failing to provide enough suitable placements for these kids.
So they end up stuck in detention.
And then there's the lack of oversight on the medical side, when it comes to these powerful drugs.
So a failure to provide support and then potentially over-medicating.
The report says some kids are kept in juvenile detention even when they're eligible for release.
Wait, so they should be out, but they're stuck there.
Simply because DFCS doesn't have an appropriate place for them to go.
That's messed up. They're being penalized for the system's failures.
It gets more complicated. The report even mentions judges being asked to consider keeping kids in detention longer.
Seriously. Because of the lack of foster care placements.
It's like this heartbreaking catch-22. These kids are stuck,
Stuck in a system that's supposed to help them.
but instead it's failing them.
Big time. And then, like you said, there's the issue of these psychotropic meds.
Yeah, the report raises red flags about the lack of oversight, like when it comes to prescribing these drugs to kids in foster care and then monitoring them.
So are they saying these kids are being over-medicated?
There's a story in the report, it's from a former foster youth, and they talk about being over-medicated, feeling like a zombie.
Oh, wow. That's powerful and disturbing.
It's a stark reminder that we got to be careful with these medications.
Especially with kids who are already vulnerable.
And it's not just a Georgia thing, it's a problem nationwide.
Really? So this is like a systemic issue.
The report references a finding by the HHS Inspector General.
That's the watchdog for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, right?
Right, and they found that a full third of foster kids on these psychotropic meds weren't being properly monitored.
That's a huge number. A third of these kids.
A systemic failure with, potentially serious consequences.
It's a lot to take in, all this.
It is. I know it could be disheartening to hear about all these problems.
Yeah, but, awareness is the first step toward change, right?
Absolutely. Got to shine a light on these issues.
And speaking of change, there's this whole other layer to this.
What do you mean?
The report points out this concerning lack of accountability within the system itself.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about the individual cases, but how the system as a whole operates.
Yeah, they focus on how the Department of Human Services, DHS, handled a 2022 report from the Office of the Child Advocate, the OCA.
Okay, so this was a report that had already identified some of these problems.
Yeah, and DHS, they basically dismissed it,
Wait, they dismissed it without a thorough investigation.
even with additional evidence available.
It makes you wonder, is there a real desire to fix things?
It's a valid question, and what's even more troubling is the investigation by DHS's own Inspector General, the OIG,
Okay, so their own internal watchdog.
was super limited, didn't even consider all the information.
Like they were intentionally trying to sweep it under the rug.
It's hard not to see it that way.
It's frustrating, but, it's not all doom and gloom. There are people working hard to make a difference.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. What's being done to address all this?
That's what we'll dive into next.
Sounds good. I'm ready for some good news.
We all are.
Let's hear it. Yeah, I think everyone's ready for some good news, right? Because digging into these sources, it's clear this whole this tension.
Tension. What do you mean?
Like, we want to protect these kids. Obviously, that's the goal.
Right. That's the whole point.
But then there's the reality, the system itself struggling,
Yeah, limited resources, tough situations, we've seen that.
It's like this push and pull, wanting to do the right thing, but facing these huge obstacles.
It's a tough balance, and I think the advocacy document, they hit on something important.
Okay. Wow.
Shifting our focus, like really shifting it
To what? To what?
from reacting to these crises to actually preventing them.
Okay, so not just putting out fires, but stopping them from starting in the first place.
Exactly. It's a different way of thinking about it.
And how do they suggest we do that?
Investing in programs that support families, help keep kids out of the system altogether.
So tackling the root causes, the things that lead to abuse or neglect in the first place.
It's like instead of patching up a boat that's already sinking, make sure it's seaworthy from the start.
Makes sense, a more proactive approach.
And it's not just talk. Commissioner Brose, in the report, they mentioned using federal funding.
Oh, from that Families First program, right?
Yeah, to provide more of these preventative services for at-risk families.
Okay, so they're putting money where their mouth is, at least to some extent.
It seems like they're moving in the right direction.
But, we've got to be careful here. Throwing money at a problem doesn't automatically solve it.
Right, we need to see results, actual improvements.
Accountability, that's key. Are these programs working? Are they reaching the right people?
Those are the tough questions we got to ask.
Absolutely. And the report, it really stresses the need for strong oversight, making sure the system is actually functioning.
Like checks and balances, making sure things are working as they should.
And that resources are being used wisely, no waste.
One area they focus on is vetting caregivers.
Making sure these are safe homes for kids, right?
Yeah, it's crucial. Remember the case we talked about, Brooklyn?
Oh, the 2-year-old who was placed with caregivers with felony records? Yeah, that was just...
That just highlights how important this vetting process is.
It can literally be a matter of life or death.
And it's not just criminal background checks.
Okay, so what else?
Assessing their homes, their parenting skills. Can they meet the needs of these kids?
Right. Foster kids often have unique needs. They've been through a lot.
And any history of substance abuse. Got to look into that.
It's about being thorough, leaving no stone unturned.
And the advocacy document, they take it even further.
Oh, how so?
Gathering input from multiple sources, not just, official records.
Okay, so like who?
Family members, neighbors, even former foster kids who might have experience with this potential caregiver.
So getting a broader perspective, more well-rounded.
It's about making informed decisions, putting the kids first.
Makes sense. More information is always better.
Now, the report also talks about the caseworkers themselves.
The people on the front lines dealing with all this day in and day out.
They need more training, more support.
We talked about the high turnover, the inexperience. This could be a way to address that.
It's a tough job, demanding, emotionally draining.
They need the tools to handle it, the training to make good judgments, be effective advocates.
So what kind of training are we talking about here?
Things like ongoing professional development, mentoring programs.
So they're not just thrown in the deep end, they get ongoing support.
And access to mental health support, that's crucial.
Yeah, these caseworkers are dealing with some heavy stuff. They need to take care of themselves too.
It's about recognizing the toll this work takes, providing the resources to prevent burnout.
If we want them to do their best for these kids, we got to support them.
Absolutely. And it's not just training. It's also about manageable caseloads.
Right. We talked about that. They're often overworked.
If you're juggling too many cases, you can't give each kid the attention they deserve.
Quality over quantity. Better to have fewer cases handled well
than a huge backlog where kids are slipping through the cracks.
Exactly. And this brings us to another important point. Collaboration.
Okay, working together, sharing the load.
DFCS can't do this alone. They need to partner with other agencies.
Like who?
Law enforcement, schools, healthcare providers, everyone involved in child welfare.
It's about creating a network, a safety net.
The report talks about clear communication, sharing information, coordinating efforts.
So everyone's on the same page, working towards the same goal.
Right. It's about building a more seamless, responsive system.
And how do they suggest that happens?
Partnering with law enforcement for quicker responses to abuse reports.
So no delays, no kids falling through the cracks.
Training schools and healthcare providers to spot potential cases.
So they can connect families with the right support, intervene early.
It's about creating this safety net that goes beyond just DFCS.
The more people looking out for these kids, the better.
And that's where the community as a whole comes in.
This idea of like everyone taking responsibility.
The advocacy document, they really emphasize public awareness, engagement.
It's not just a government problem, it's a societal issue.
We all have a role to play, and that can feel overwhelming,
Yeah, like where do I even start?
but there are tangible things individuals can do.
Okay, give me some examples.
Volunteering at a child advocacy center, mentoring a foster youth,
So directly supporting kids, being a positive presence in their lives,
even offering respite care for foster families, giving them a break,
or donating to shelters, providing essential items.
even just listening to a struggling parent, offering support, that can make a difference.
It's about building a more supportive community, breaking down stigmas.
The report also talks about kids who've experienced trauma, especially trafficking victims.
That's a whole other layer of complexity. Those kids need specialized care.
Trauma-informed care,
Yeah.
recognizing the impact of their experiences.
So not just treating the symptoms, but understanding the root cause.
What would that look like in practice?
Training for caseworkers, caregivers, how to recognize and respond to these kids' needs.
So they can provide the right kind of support, sensitive to their trauma.
And access to mental health services, therapy, tailored to their specific needs.
It's about meeting them where they are. Requires vigilance, advocacy, constantly adapting, learning.
And that's where we come in, right? As individuals, as a society.
We can't become complacent. Every action matters.
What can our listeners do if they want to get involved?
That's what we'll explore as we wrap up this deep dive. So, yeah, I think we've covered a lot.
We have. It's a lot to process, right?
This deep dive, it's been intense, Georgia's foster care system.
Yeah, the problems, the impact on these kids, it's heavy stuff.
But important, to really understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And for me, one of the big takeaways, this isn't just some government problem.
Right. It's not just DFCS. It goes beyond that.
It's a societal issue. We all have a role to play.
That's what the advocacy document really drives home, community involvement.
It's about recognizing that responsibility, to look out for these kids.
To support families who are struggling, it takes a village, right?
That's the saying. And they're not just saying it. They offer real suggestions.
Oh, yeah. Ways to get involved.
Yeah, practical stuff. Volunteering at a child advocacy center, for example.
Okay, so like getting directly involved, hands-on.
Or mentoring a foster youth, being a positive influence in their life.
Making that one-on-one connection, that can be huge.
And even smaller things, offering respite care for foster families.
Giving them a break, a chance to recharge.
Donating to shelters, providing essential items, those things add up.
Even just being there for a struggling parent, listening, offering support.
Sometimes that's all it takes, someone to talk to, someone who cares.
And then there's advocacy, right? Speaking up for those who can't.
Contacting your elected officials, supporting good legislation.
Holding DFCS accountable, using our voices to push for change.
It's about making a difference at that systemic level.
Every child deserves a safe, loving environment. We got to make that happen.
It's a shared responsibility, We can't just sit back and expect someone else to fix it.
I'm reminded of that quote, Nelson Mandela. There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children.
Powerful words. It really gets to the heart of this.
How we treat our most vulnerable, that says a lot about us.
So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do?
Take some time. Think about what you've learned, what resonated with you.
Yeah, what sparked that passion, that desire to get involved?
And then explore. See what's out there in your community.
We'll include some links in the show notes, organizations doing great work.
And for those who want to dive even deeper, the full Senate Subcommittee report is online.
It's all about knowledge. The more we know, the more we can do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this.
Okay, what's that?
The situation in Georgia's foster care system, it's complex, no easy answers.
But that doesn't mean we give up.
Change as is possible. It starts with each of us.
Taking responsibility, raising our voices, working together.
Creating a better future for these kids, that's the goal.
And even small actions can make a difference, a ripple effect.
Let's commit to doing our part, protecting these vulnerable children.
Building a society where every child has the opportunity to thrive.
That's what we're all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been real. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.